work session started. Megan, for the record, can you let us know if city officials are present this evening?
Yes, sir. Safety Service Director Barbara Sylvester.
Present.
City Engineer Alex Pitts.
Present.
Economic Development Director David Maley. Bless you. Parks and Rec Director Steve Pedro.
Present.
And Health Department Commissioner Terry Argent.
Present.
And I see Samantha Walters.
Thank you. Let the record show that 8 members of council are present this evening. Michael Drake was unable to make it, and President of Council is also present with us this evening. It does look like the mayor is entering as well at this time. Community development.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. I have a couple items that fall under new business. The first is please prepare an ordinance authorizing the Safety Service Director of the City of Massillon, Ohio to advertise, obtain bids, and enter into a contract for the construction of the splash pad at Montville Park. It is requested to be considered an emergency to expedite the bidding process. And Mr. Lewis.
I was just going to ask if you mind if we share this conversation, because I have a finance piece with it. So we're
Yes.
do both conversations at the same time.
Perfect. Can someone from administration, Parks and Rec, anybody that wants to come up and discuss this topic with us?
Good evening. In essence, it's pretty straightforward. We've already talked about splash pad, I think, in depth. This would allow us to go out to bid and into the contract for the splash pad at Walker Park. Our budget currently is about $1.1 million. That's what we're looking at. We've had some initial drawings, but we are still finishing up having that as finalized. The financing piece would require, I think, $784,000. That's specifically coming out of the 1100 fund. That's because of the grant we received from the state of Ohio. We received 2 capital grants. One was for $500,000 and one was for $300,000. There's a 2% administrative fee that they take out of that. So we anticipate getting reimbursed for $784,000. There is a provision that they've added to the newer grants that they've not done in the past, which you can apply for up front and get 1/3 of the amount that you have available for the grants. So we were looking at probably about $260,000. So we could apply for $260,000 if we have something to go and spend money on. We're looking at 2 things that we would anticipate hopefully getting done before the end of the year. And that's, we have prefab restrooms that we're going to be putting in, and then the equipment for the splash pad itself. If we do that, we can beat the price increase for next year, get it on order, and then it will take some time to get them shipped and everything.
So those prefab restrooms, is that part of the 1.1 mil, or is that
Yes.
in addition?
Yeah, and I think it's a misconception to a degree when we're talking about splash pad at 1.1 million. There are other things going on with regards to improvements to the park, and that includes the prefab restrooms. There's currently a building there that's houses the restroom. We would use that for storage. That facility would be upgraded. There's some areas around that the splash pad would be upgraded. So there are additional things we're looking at, possibly some additional playground equipment. So those are other things that we're looking at as part of the 1.1 million.
So I'm looking at this correctly, and Mr. Lewis, stop me if I'm overstepping. With the 2 capital grants, there's going to be an amount of about $316,000 remaining. Where's that money coming from?
We've already committed part of our ARPA money for the splash pad was $300,000.
Okay. I know when this was mentioned and brought up and presented to us months back, I know there was like a lot of questions that we didn't have the answers at that time, you know, the size of it, safety issues, security issues, hours of operation, maintenance of this. Have those questions been considered, and do we have answers to those questions at this time?
We don't have a final plan. We're still actually the size and everything is still being, like I said, discussed. We should have a final plan within a couple weeks. But we wanted to bring this forward so we can start moving and getting the funding in place so we can get out the bid and get the project started.
Mr. Sims.
Thank you, Mrs. Kramer. Do we have any plans on updating the baseball fields there, the backstops or putting fences into the baseball fields?
That'd be probably a better question for the Parks Director.
Mr. Lewis.
What building contingencies do we have on that 1.1 million, you know, to protect ourselves from overpayment?
As far as overruns,
Yeah.
I'd have to look at it, but I think there's, usually they put like a 10% contingency, I think it's a 10% contingency on this.
So we're getting probably somewhere in the ballpark of 1 million for the project with 100,000 in contingencies.
Yes.
Any other council members have questions for Mr. Maley at this time? Mr. Lewis, I'll turn it over to you.
Anybody about finance discussion? What is the time frame for this?
As far as, we'd like to have it built and operational by spring of next year.
I mean, as far as, you know, if we're wanting to give this a couple of readings, you're not against a hard wall right at this moment.
We are not, but we'd like, I do have an emergency on us, we can move forward, that helps.
All right. I just, when we get a chance, one back here from the park director to answer Mr. Luce's question.
I'm just going to ask the maintenance department, maybe Mr. Pedro can come up and answer questions regarding, you know, who's responsible for the maintenance, staffing, additional resources for staffing, insurance, liability, all those good things that come into play. I want to make sure they're 100% behind this project, and there's no time in where there's going to be finger pointing and someone's supposed to cover the costs and the other, you know, so on and so on. So, Mr. Pedro.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me today. When we started this project, we are all under the understanding once it's over, it becomes a Parks and Rec facility. We don't know exactly the cost of the maintenance right now until it's built, until we get the final design when it goes out to bid. I don't even want to give you a number. It could be different, but we've all talked about this over the last couple of years now. We do understand it's going to be part of our Park and Rec facilities. Insurance, you mentioned insurance, just like anything else we have. You know, staffing, you really don't staff it a whole lot. These places are open to the public. It's checked on, we'll have cameras up, different things like that.
Mr. Lewis.
This isn't necessarily a question for Mr. Peter, but more of a generality. I really think we need to make sure this goes a couple of readings. And this isn't Mr. Peter's fault or maybe Mr. Peters, but it seems like we're getting a lot of what we won't know until, but we're committing this $785,000. I know we have a capital grant coming through and reimbursable, but it would be nice to be able to have a few more of the answers to security, maintenance costs. Like, what is the Parks and Rec board agreeing to? You know, what is that number going to be? Those kind of things. If we somehow get someone that provides those estimates.
Thank you, Mrs. Kramer. Can you address the ball fields for me?
Yes, that is not part of this project. Every year we go through our fields and evaluate them and see what we need to do next. If we get something worked on over the winter, we'll do that. Did you have a concern up there?
Well, no, that's just a great field to sit on that hill and watch ball games.
Yeah, it's one of our best.
My son, Mike Greg's kid, we coach kids up there. Actually, we got the ball field kind of going again. Myself and a friend put some drainage in up there back 12 years ago. And I just think it's a great place to watch a ball game, as long as, the backstops look like they need some attention. And I just want to see if that's possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything's possible.
Mr. Lombardi?
Thank you, Mrs. Kramer. I just want to state that I agree with Mr. Lewis. I think before moving forward on this at all, we need to know what the maintenance and security costs are that we're going to be committing the city to.
Somehow, Mr. Petro, if you can reach out to other municipalities that have some type of splash pad, possibly in the same dimensions, what they pay for maintenance, what, just to give us some type of, ballpark figure, so we know what we're
We
working
can
with.
do that and get some numbers and some information for you.
Okay, thank you. The second item, under new business, please prepare an ordinance authorizing the sale of certain city-owned vacant lots by advertising and receiving sealed bids and awarding the highest and best bidder in accordance with guidelines established under Chapter 166, Land Reutilization Program for the codified ordinances of the city of Massillon, Ohio. The properties to be sold as follows. So we have a list, I believe, of 17 properties. Ms. Walters, would you like to come up and, I know we approved the land utilization program weeks back, and we have additional properties at this time. Can you give us additional information regarding these properties and how it came about?
Sure. So the majority of these properties were transferred from the Stark County Land Reutilization Corporation, which we did the NIP program and tore down houses on these lots. And after 3 years, if they weren't picked up by a side lot, they transfer back to the city. So then we can go ahead and include them in our public bidding process. We do have bids open for the properties that were approved several weeks ago. So that's going pretty well. And anything that doesn't sell, we'll put back out to bid with this set of properties as well.
So if this is approved by council, these properties, what's the timeline for these? Since the previous round one was August 1st through August 31st. What's the timeline for this if approved by council?
Once approved, if everything goes okay, we can have them out immediately and we'll set a 30-day open period for that as well. Since the program's already in place now, we've got everything set to be able to advertise it on the website, and I placed an ad in the Independent this past round for our first time going through everything, so it should move pretty quickly.
Are residents having difficulty maneuvering through the program and the application? Are you getting any calls regarding this?
I've gotten a couple questions regarding front footage. So the only thing that I did change on this list of properties is I actually put the front footage and what would be required for a minimum bid then on this sheet. That way they have a little bit less confusion.
Okay, thank you. Council members, any questions for Ms. Walters? How is this? So it does have a request for emergency to allow immediate advertisement of properties upon passage. Any concerns from council members with that statement? Okay, thank you very much. My last item, which falls under old business, is please prepare legislation to create the designated outdoor refreshment area, DORA, in the city of Massillon under ORC 4301.82. So I'd like to have a little bit more discussion. We did hear from Chief St. Louis at the last work session, confirming that he believes the safety issue that we were considering or concerned about, he felt good about being able to address that. Also, Safety Service Director Sylvester addressed the trash, not only in the receptacles, but throughout this area. Concerns regarding the days of the week, Mr. Lombardi.
These aren't the days of the week. The one thing that I did want to clarify is I've heard from audience comments that, talking about drinking in the amphitheater area, it is my understanding that the amphitheater is a park and there is no drinking allowed in public parks. I just want to make sure that gets clarified to the council and to, you know, everybody, what is going to be the terms of that there.
Okay. Well, let's ask someone from administration to please come forward and address this concern.
From Parks and Rec. Last year in June, this council passed an ordinance to state that alcohol could be consumed in Duncan Plaza with the approval of the rec board. That is a new ordinance. That was, I can't remember the number, but last year it was passed.
It would be in the codifieds
Yeah.
under liquor prohibited.
Just to answer your question, Mr. Hardy.
So I got just clarifying that with park board approval.
Yes.
So is that individual events?
Right now it is. We've had individual events where the rec board had to approve alcohol consumption in the plaza.
So if this store would move forward, then there would be no alcohol consumption in Duncan Plaza unless we receive approval on specific days and times from the park board. Is that correct?
Just my opinion, I think that needs to be revisited if this should move forward. I think something else.
But
needs to
currently
be-
as it stands?
Currently as it stands, I don't think we, you know, we only meet once a month, so
Okay.
if it does move forward, I think that needs to be revisited and maybe a new ordinance. Just my opinion, I'm
Okay.
not a law department, so.
Does anyone else have any additional questions for Mr. Pedro? Okay, thank you. So currently, the days of the week, Sunday through Wednesday, 12 p to 10 p, and Thursday through Saturday, 12 p through 12 a. So this encompasses 36.7 acres. Concerns with the days of the week, the times? Mr. Ryan?
Thank you, Mrs. Kramer. Could you do the times one more?
Yes. Sunday through Wednesday, 12 p to 10 p. And Thursday through Saturday, 12 p to 12 a. Ryan?
So doesn't that cut out Saturday night?
We shut it off at 12 a.m. That's how it's
Saturday
written.
morning?
No, 12 p to 12 a Saturday.
For 11:59.
Saturday night.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Maybe it should be 11:59 p.m. I mean,
We do 11:59 p.m.
I mean, just, yeah, so there's no confusion.
Or just make it 24/7.
And I want to just, from administration, verify with them that city will have oversight to this area. Can administration confirm that?
Oversight?
Well, we're taking care of the safety, we're evaluating this program, we're taking care of trash. I believe the only thing I'm understanding is possibly the designated cups may be purchased from the business owners from the chamber. Is that correct?
Through the chamber and the CIC, yes. And then, yeah, we would be responsible for the safety plan and sanitation. And we would evaluate that on a regular basis.
Mr. Sleuth?
Thank you. So you're saying we'll shut this down at midnight on Saturday night? Is that what these? But the bars are open until 2 or 2:30. I think that's going to cause a lot of problems for our police department. Going down there and having to shut things down and enforcing maybe some of the ordinances. I don't know if 12 midnight would be good for the weekends. People are not walking around all night, going bar to bar.
Recommendations? I'm sure, I mean, that's
We're open
something
for-
for us
we're
to
open.
discuss, if that's something.
We just, to that point, we just want to make like Friday would be 12 p to 11:59 p.m. Saturdays would be 12 a to 2 a, 12 p to 11:59 p.m. You know, and that way you get that extra.
Well, I think if we do Saturday night, we should do Friday night also.
Well, that's what I mean. It would be,
It should go till 2:30 if we're going to do this.
but technically that would be a Saturday, 12 a to 2. See what I'm saying? It's technically a Saturday once you guys midnight.
Right.
So when you draft it, you have to draft it as a Saturday morning. You know, but doing what you said.
Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Lombardi?
I'm thinking that if we go all the way to 2:30, we could run into a problem because in a bar, you have to have the drinks off the table or off the bar at 2:30. So if you're standing outside, for your drink that you just got at 2:25, and you're still drinking, you're past the Ohio State liquor laws.
Well, let's consider 2 a.m. then.
I'd be happy to, I don't know this for a fact, but I'm not sure some of the other, like there's 5 other here outdoors in Stark County. I just remember most of them shut down around midnight, but I don't know that for a fact. Look and see where some of the others are going.
And I'm just saying maybe Friday and Saturday night. That way I believe it'll alleviate a lot of the problems that the police department would have to deal with. And they'll be available to answer other emergency calls. Thank you.
Mr. Lombardi?
Thank you, Mrs. Creamer. I'm just wondering if we could get a map that's actually legible and correct. According to this map, the way Mr. Violet and I both see it, we have downtown Hex down on Diamond and Charles, and that's on Lincoln Way. And most of these numbers are unreadable. So I'd like to, first off, see if we could get a map that's actually legible and correct. And I do want to raise an objection to the times. I think noon is a little bit early for this to start. I'm thinking more after business hours, number one. And number two, I do have a problem with any of this overlaying a residential area. And there are some residential areas on this map that I think that I would have a major problem with. If I were living at a home that I purchased or that I'm renting in downtown Massillon, and all of a sudden they included it in Adora, I would not be happy. And I think we need to consider the residents as well.
Thank you. Anyone else? Ms. Harbert-Smith?
In regards to Mr. Lombardi's, would we have to have an open hearing then and notify anyone that's a resident that lives within so many feet of the door? Does everybody, no, not required?
Not that I'm aware of. I don't believe we have any residential zoned areas within the door. They're close by, but none within the door. I don't believe there's anything that requires, I mean, we have to do a notification and have a public hearing on it. There's nothing we have to notify a specific party.
Any additional questions? Mr. Lewis?
I was going to say, I think, if I remember correctly from when I looked at the map, the reason they avoid the residential is because they come down first and not second. When they come down first, there wasn't, is that what you're meaning?
Yeah.
In order to get the paradigm, they come down first and then turn east.
Yeah, we purposely took those houses out, but we did the best we can.
So Second Street where the residentials are, they would not. But to Mr. Lombardi's point,
it's not a big map, the numbers in the circles are illegible, at least to me. And number two, it's not red. You have X Downtown Tap Room on Charles and Diamond, and it's on Lincoln Way.
I didn't do the math, so.
Well, I'm just saying, that's what the map, I'd like a correct map showing exactly where the businesses are, and so we can actually read what's in the circles.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have, Mr. Davis.
Economic Development?
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. We had a committee work session, committee meeting on this back in the springtime regarding the economic development inducement grant program. What you have in front of you are some thoughts that I put together on making that program, which we're operating, but really under no codified basis or anything that kind of points to the ins and outs of the program. So I'll go over this briefly with you. I guess I'll start by reading it. Please prepare legislation to establish the economic development grant program as outlined in the attached documents. The first thing I looked at was, I did change the name. I don't think that it really serves as an inducement in a lot of cases. A lot of grants that we have provided to small businesses are ones that are already established. So I think just as a matter of course, I think that the name needs a little look at too. The purpose is to promote economic development, business expansion, and job creation by providing funding for eligible projects in the city of Massillon. There's an eligibility section that basically just highlights a lot of, on paper, a lot of the activities that we are currently doing: building improvements, leasehold improvements, purchase or upgrade of machinery or equipment, moving and relocation costs of machinery and equipment related to the project, infrastructure improvement, site development. Has a laundry list of ineligible uses that are specifically identified. I pulled a lot of these from other grant programs at local level and at the state level. Application process pretty much stays the same. Applications through the city's Office of Economic Development. I did include the third and fourth pages, some background information. A lot of this was based on the conversation we did have at our committee meeting, and I thought I kind of encompassed as much as possible as I could. I also did run this past Mr. Mack, Mr. Richard, and Mr. Wise at the law department. With the application, I think a background information submission should be required as well, and it consists of three things. One, if you've owned or operated a business for less than 5 years, please submit a real business plan consisting of the following 8 or 9 sections: executive summary, company description, organization and management, market analysis and strategy, etc. This is what a traditional business plan encompasses. This is not foreign to most folks who do run a business. There are also, as you can see notated, resources available at the Ohio Small Business Development Center at Can Start and at Can Score. Two, I have seen other programs where they do ask for financial statements for prior 3 years available. I think that's a good barometer of, since we are making an investment from the public end to a private business, I do think it's pertinent to look at financial statements of those companies to make sure that they are viable and worthy of the assistance. A normal bank, when you go for a loan, would probably look at the same thing. Number 3, here are several questions. I think there are 6 or 5 that are basically just to be filled out by the applicant. Are you now? Have you ever been delinquent on any federal, state, or local taxes? If yes, explain. Have you ever been convicted of a felony? If yes, explain. Is the company or business owner currently involved in any criminal or civil action? If yes, explain. Are there any unpaid judgments against the company? If yes, explain. And have you ever been subject to an investigation by a federal or state regulatory body, or have a business license suspended? I think that's also a pertinent question to a lot of the entities that we do deal with in terms of business licensing and regulation. I think this is, maybe except for the background information, which we've never asked for before, but I think we should start asking. I think it's pretty basic. And a lot of the things on the grant program guidelines aren't really out of of bounds considering what we've been doing with these grants for the last several years. I think it just puts pen to paper and puts an outline that we can put in our ordinances so people are well aware of what the projects we're looking for. And most of the things, I can't really think of one that we've passed recently that wouldn't fall into any of these eligible uses. And again, I think it's important to identify some ineligible activities just so we're all clear. Any questions from the committee, Mr. Gilman or Mrs. Hardwick-Smith?
Yeah, I have one, as far as, I'm okay asking these questions, but I'm not okay airing people's personal business. I think it kind of crosses the line. If they put this on the application, like if someone ever had a felony from something they did years ago and they put it on here and they're trying to grow a new business and they turn the light around, I don't think it's up to us to air their past dirty laundry. I mean, I think this is good for us, but I think we need to have certain things we need to keep confidential for people when they're applying. Or are you intending like all this is to be out in the open?
Two things. One, I think the things that we're asking cannot be readily found by anyone on Star CJIS or any other criminal justice website. And second point is I would defer to the law department and the city's public records policy on what kind of information would be considered exempt from a public record. If that makes sense.
Thank you. That's all I have. Looks good.
Mr. Gillen? Anything from other members of council? Mr. Lewis?
So outside the application, because that's obviously all new design, is the rest of this more of just putting some frame to kind of what was loosely being done, but actually gear solidifying it now?
Are you speaking more to the first two pages of the
Yeah,
second?
the first two.
The first two pages, I think, just succinctly say what we pretty much been doing. I don't think, as I've gone over this, I don't really think there's anything that would make any grant that we've given in the past ineligible, so to speak. So I think it just kind of succinctly says what we're already currently doing, and just puts it in a form.
Keeps it nice and neat for everybody. And then as far as the application, the questions you ask, those aren't necessarily disqualifiers. So my concern is when we start looking at people's criminal background records and things like that, if you're 20 years old and you make a mistake and now you're 40, we want to make sure we're not eliminating people from living their best life, I guess.
I don't intend for any of this background information to be exclusionary in any respect. What would exclude an individual would be the eligibility requirements and the ineligible activities. This is just information I think that we need to gather and have to make an informed decision. There is a level of subjectivity, obviously, from the administration standpoint and what they feel comfortable forwarding on to council. And I also state in one of these things, I think on page 2, that council retains sole authority to approve or deny any grant application, just like we currently do now. So no, I don't see any of these questions to be making one ineligible. It's just information I think we need to have.
And to Julie's point, maybe we can either confer with the law department, maybe something as simple as saying, we would appreciate the following questions being answered there, optional, and a reminder we can submit to a public records request. And then the applicant can decide if they want to actually put the information on there or not. And if they don't put it on there, then it might impact the decision. But they're making a conscious decision at that point to allow it to be public.
Mr. Matt, would you come up for a moment, please?
So if an applicant submits a request for public funding, the documents submitted are going to be public records unless they're trade secrets as defined by the statute. That's a pretty high burden. They have to be able to demonstrate that they generate, independent economic value from that information being kept secret, and steps are taken to preserve confidentiality of it. I think, for example, pricing, projection strategies, things like that, things that if a competitor got a hold of it would cause an economic damage. That stuff can be designated as a trade secret, but that's something that the applicant has to take the step to do. And that's, you know, a high burden, and it doesn't guarantee that if somebody submits, one of their competitors submits a public records request, that a court will agree with that. Long way of saying, you know, kind of the rule of thumb that if you're going to ask for public assistance, you're going to be subject to public scrutiny. But there are protections for the super secret stuff that could hurt the applicant.
Thank you. Does that answer the question? Okay. Mrs. Harwood-Smith.
Are we still going to base the amount we give them for the economic grant on a point system, like the current one that we have, or are we changing that also? I don't see it in the packet.
Yeah, I didn't address that because I'm okay with the point system. I think that's, the administration has that body too. I think if they want to rank those according to points and a fixed dollar amounts to them, that's fine.
I just worry about, like, my previous question when I'm, you know, you're asking these questions and people, I don't want to do, people apply for a grant and then them hurting their business because the people are carrying their past dirty laundry or something when they're trying to grow. We're trying to help them be better. We don't want them, you know, like everything doesn't need to keep getting brought up if it was something in the past. I definitely think, you know, as far as taxes and everything else, if you're not paying your taxes and all that, it should be, I like your ineligible uses there, but I'm just not sure on some of this being publicly known. I think people deserve privacy. That's all.
Yeah, this to me was kind of a compromise because there were several members of council who, when we did have our committee meeting, were talking about full background checks and things like that. That would have been, I'm sure, a public record as well. So I think this is kind of really being more concise in terms of the questions, I think, or the information that would allow us to make a decision. So, any other questions from council? Mr. Lombardi?
And this isn't a question, but two observations. On question 2, you're saying to provide financial statements for prior 3 years if available. I think we need to rework that because we've done these for startup businesses as well. And they're not going to have 3 years of financial statements.
That's the if available.
Yeah, I'd reword it to where it looks a little bit like if it's not a new business or it isn't, you know, it's an established business or whatever. The other thing is the point system that we're currently using, if you're planning on keeping that, I think that needs to be written into this as well as the what the dollar amounts are, because sometimes it comes out to be, you know, this person got 7 points and got $7,000, and this person got 7 points and got $8,000 because the spread is $7,000 to $10,000 or whatever, and we just decided arbitrarily what they were going to get. I think that needs to actually be spelled out here in the legislation, so everybody is dealt with exactly the same, with the same fairness.
So, if you look on page 2, under application process, would you like me to add something that states, well, the administration does the scoring process, so it's not technically part of the application, but, okay. All right, we'll figure out how to add that in there. If we put, Mr. Sneed, you're good. So to Mr. Lombardi's point, if we wanted to include the scoring checklist as part of the ordinance, can we add that? If we put it on the agenda for Monday, can we add it on then, or does it need to be put on at the very beginning? I guess that's a general question.
You can add it this week as long as your members of your committee agree to it verbally, and it'll still be on the agenda for Monday. Okay. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so.
Well, let me play devil's advocate for a second.
Go ahead.
Because I was on the same road as Mr. Lombardi, and the only thing that causes me pause, something to think about, is the minute you put the ranges in there, then any time if we decide we wanted to increase the amounts or decrease the amount, like say we now have a max amount of what, like 10,000, 5 years from now we want to increase it to 15,000, because we have to open up this whole ordinance in order to do so. So there's some, not a bad
have the application itself available, and they are free to make that application, say, form, things like that. I don't know if, and that's a good point about if we wanted to change the dollar amounts. I don't know if, it's something that they can do. I don't know if it needs to be in what we're talking about here, if that makes sense. Yes.
Okay, so what if we did,
And we could look at that separately if you want.
well, I'm thinking, what if we did the point system and then say, like, 1 to 5, level 1, 6 to 10, level 2. And that's where they fall in, level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4, level 5, and then we can affix, we don't have to affix dollar amounts to those levels. Then the levels can speak for the dollar amounts outside of the legislation. So if we want to do level 1 is $3,000, level 2 is $5,000, level 6 is, or whatever. But we don't have to write the dollar amounts into the legislation. But it keeps us on an even keel as far as 1 to 5 points is going to get this level. Because do you understand what I'm talking about? We've had somebody, they score between 1 and 5, and they get $2,000, and another business scores between 1 and 5, and they get $3,000, because it's a range. 1 to 5 is like, $1 to $3,000, and there's no science behind it. When you're looking at it, it's like one business gets this, one business gets that, because that's what they asked for, or that's what somebody decided, that's what they were given. This way, we lock it into a level. If you point out between 1 and 5, you're at level 1. Level 1 equals, whatever dollar amount we affix to it outside of the legislation. Are you getting where I'm going?
Yeah, I am. I'm just wondering if you would be okay if we had that as a separate conversation and not necessarily a part of this right now.
If we don't do it in this, then it probably won't get written. That's what I'm saying. Right now, it's very subjective as to what level you point out at and how much money you're going to get. And I think this legislation needs to nail down at least where that money is going to, where it's going to fall. Okay, and if we don't want to affix dollar amounts to it, then I'm asking that we affix levels to it. We can affix dollar amounts to the levels outside of the legislation. But if you're going to put the program together, put the complete program together in the legislation, not just part of it.
Well, okay, I see what you're saying, but I also see the administration does have some input in this, and I don't want to totally tie their hands in terms of, the economic development director talks to a business, the business says, I need X amount of dollars. Those negotiations, I think, is outside of our purview a little bit from a legislative standpoint. I think there does have to be some involvement from the administration on those things. I just want to shore up the things that we're asking for. So I guess I'm not quite sure what does anyone else think about adding what Mr. Lombardi said to this? Mrs. Harwood-Smith.
I think if we're working on this to change it and get it down defined, I think we should include the whole point thing with it too, because this is part of their application. That way they know what they're. Instead of like you said, because before we've given other people, and it's just like, oh yes, so we'll give him 6, we'll give him 7. Where if they come out to a certain thing, it's a set amount.
Mr. Lewis.
I think if we do the points thing, then you're probably going to have to go to first reading on Tuesday, and we're going to need another committee meeting to tease out exactly what those ranges are and what that looks like.
And for that matter, if we're going to do that, we should probably include the application itself.
Sounds like you just don't put it on the agenda for Tuesday and just bring it back up in 2 weeks.
I will do that. Let's discuss this again at the next work session. I'll get with Mr. Bailey, we'll get the application and the other thing, and we'll have that conversation on the next work session. And that's all for economic development.
Open welfare.
I do a piece tonight for the health department. It says, an ordinance enacting chapter 962 cemeteries. Under Title 5, Other Public Services of Part 9, Streets, Utilities, and Public Service Code of the Codified Ordinance of the City of Massillon, Ohio, for the disposition of deceased indigents and the administration thereof. Whenever the city is legally responsible for the disposition and related costs of deceased persons found to be indigent pursuant to Revised Code 9.15, the city assigns the responsibility to the Massillon City Board of Health. An ordinance is needed to formally establish the terms and conditions of this assignment and the procedures for administration. A proposed ordinance is effectuate. This is attached here to as Exhibit A. Terry Argent from the Health Department is here. I'd like to call you up to explain this, please.
Yes, the Ohio Revised Code says the municipality where the person lives is responsible for the dispensation of indigents. And that's been handled before in the past by either safety service director, law director, wherever the call comes into. We just want to streamline that procedure to the health department will handle that. And that kind of makes sense because we already have the death certificates, we already have relationships with the funeral homes.
Thank you. Does any council members have any questions? Mrs. Green?
So are we moving forward for the 2024 budgets, are we going to budget X amount of dollars for this purpose?
That's already in the budget, it's been in the budget as long as I can remember.
Right, but is it going to be transferred to the health department since you guys are going to be overseeing this?
No, it'll still come out of the 1100 fund, the general fund. If the department will actually get the money, the check will be written from the general fund straight to whatever funeral home gets the dispensation.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Mrs. Murray, thank you. There is no emergency language for this, so I will sign this on the agenda next week. Thank you.
Parks and Rec?
Yes, I have one new item. I don't know, for Parks and Rec, if Mr. Pedro wants to give us an update on the Lawndale Park improvement. The subject of this request for legislation is to authorize the Director of Parks and Recreation to accept a $1,313.81 donation for the Lawndale improvement project.
First, I want to apologize for my mistake. I had Diane do extra work today. I'll try not to do that again. This is something we've been working on since the beginning of the year, and I believe all of you have some of the information. A young man that passed away that lived near Lawndale Park. He was a Central High School student. His family came to me. We talked about doing some things. Their goal was to raise $20,000 on their own, and I can tell you to this date, they've raised $17,818. We have $16,830 that committed already, which that includes a gaga pit, which is a circular pit that kids can play in. There's a memorial wall that has been put up here. You can go by Lawndale, you see that, it's 8 feet tall. Dutch Valley contractors put that up, and we're having a mural put on that wall as well. And then we're adding picnic tables. And in the future, or the other thing we did basketball court renovation, which was included in our yearly budget for the Parks and Rec, 2 new basketball hoops and playground mulch. We are going to next year add sidewalks for accessibility. And we're looking at that throughout the city to start doing that so people can get in and out of our parks and they have issues walking. And then a swing set up there as well. That's where we're at right now.
Thank you, Mr. Pedro. I will go ahead and put this on for Monday. Oh, did anyone else have any questions? I'm sorry. All right, thank you.
Police and Fire?
Thank you, Mr. Lewis, nothing for police and fire tonight.
Public Utilities?
Business this evening, thank you.
Rules and Courts?
Nothing this evening.
Streets, Highways?
Thank you, Mr. Lewis, nothing for streets and highways.
It's the CDBG funding for the following activities for the program year 23-24. The budget for these activities was approved in ordinance 44 this year, and the interaction plan has been approved by the youth of IHUD. They're now available, and we're just appropriating them, correct?
That is correct.
Are there any questions for Ms. Walters this evening? Discussion? Excellent job, Ms. Walters. We'll put this on the agenda for Tuesday. We now have also please prepare legislation authorizing the mayor to submit the following application for funding to the OTWC for the funding year 2024. Alex Pitts, are you here to speak on this?
Good evening, Council. Yes, so this is just legislation to request submitting an application to the OPWC for fiscal year 2024. So it's for Tremont Avenue, the resurfacing project from 5th Street to Main Avenue. And then for Lincoln Way Phase 3 improvement project, it's going to involve the intersections at 1st and Lincoln Way, 1st Street, Southwest and Lincoln Way, and 1st Street Northwest and Lincoln Way. And it will also add additional street lighting as part of the project. So, and again, I just want to reiterate, this is just a request to submit for the application for OPWC. So,
And these are typically the 80-20 funds, like they go cover 80 and we
this one we're requesting for 50/50.
30-50.
Yes.
And when are the application deadlines?
I will have to check on that and get back with you maybe tomorrow if that works.
Okay, that's fine. And is the goal, I think, if I remember correctly in the past, that you submit both because the higher the dollar amount and the bigger the project, the more likely you would receive the grant, or is this?
It really just depends. So it's not necessarily true that the higher the dollar amount, the bigger, the more likely that you'll get the grant. Honestly, it just depends on the voting and the application, the review of the application and how it's scored. So
I do know that we have some members of council that have hesitation with a certain part of this. So my objective, as long as the other members of the finance chair committee are okay with it, I'd like to sign it to at least get it on the agenda on Monday. And then the idea is we probably take a vote to divide or separate the question so that council would be able to vote on Tremont independently of Lincoln Way Phase 3. And then they would each stand on their own merits, and then members could vote their conscience on each one of those independently. That would work for everybody, unless someone on finance committee has an objection. I guess I'm talking to you, Ms. Lombardi, because Mr. Grant's not here.
And I'm the one who had the problem with them being together. I'd really rather see the legislation separated into two before it goes on the agenda.
I guess my only problem is that that's not how it's drafted. So to get the signature, you know what I'm saying, I don't have two pieces of legislation request here. So I don't know. I don't know what the answer to that would be, I guess. My standard response, or my standard process would be to divide the question into council vote on the separate divided question. If we're going to look at two separate pieces of legislation, that might be more of a Diane, if that's something that you think they're able to do, and what issues would that pose to?
Yeah, I think we would have to have two separate requests for legislations. We've done this before. If you pass the one piece, then I have to redo it, the ordinance, and then you vote on that ordinance with, if you do Tremont or Lincoln Way, whichever one it is. It would have to, it would, I don't know if it would be amended or redone. to research that, Ed? Because I know we did something like this before that included Parks and Rec, to my memory.
All right,
And
well, why don't we do this real quick? This is going to be a little bit of maneuvering for you, all right?
Okay,
I'm going to cross out Lincoln Way Phase 3.
okay.
Tonight's signatures is for Tremont. Mr. Pitts, if you can submit a additional piece just like this tomorrow to Ms. Rowland, I'll provide Ms. Rowland my verbal for Lincoln Way Phase 3, and then Mr. Drake may do so as well, and then they're standing as 2 separate ordinances on next Tuesday, and then if both pass, you apply together. If one passes and one fails, then you apply for the one that's passed.
Sounds good? Yep.
That, I'll give my verbal for the other one as well.
You mean you give your signature for Tremont?
I'll sign for Tremont, and I'll give my verbal for the other one to go on the agenda as well.
Are there any additional comments from administration on this piece? I always say that you're good with this, and I want to make sure that you feel like you're getting a fair representation. It's a tricky one to have to address this on the first time.
The only thing I will add to that is, as you are aware, there is a timetable that we have to apply for this, and this is only given consent to apply. It doesn't mean that, you're passing anything to appropriate funds or even approve the project at all. They made some changes. If you remember the last 2 years, you now have to have an ordinance before they will even consider your application. Alex will have to include the ordinance number with the application. So in the past, you didn't have to have that at that time. Council could approve it after the projects were awarded, but they made that change. So this is really just to be able to submit the application with an ordinance number.
I have a question, Barb. In the emergency language, it says funding request beginning September 2024 via online. Is that correct?
I'm not sure what it would. September is when the application is due. I do know that, but I don't have the exact date. As Alex said, he can give you the exact date, but it is September.
Well, it just says 2024.
For the 24 dates which you're questioning, yeah. So maybe that's a mistake.
Yeah, it just might be a typo.
You have the authority to correct this.
Thank you.
Check the protocols.
Any other questions? Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
Please prepare an ordinance to appropriate $127,503 from the unappropriated balance of the 1229 Home Fund. Appropriation is needed to cover expenses for home activities, including housing rehab, housing systems projects, and all expenses paid from this account funded through the Stark County Regional Planning Commission. Are there any questions on the agenda? Please approve legislation to appropriate $3,110 from the appropriated balance of the Parks and Rec to the Legends Hospital dental account for the purpose of paying health insurance costs throughout the rest of the year. The board has already approved this measure. Are there any other additional questions? Then we have the splash pad I already signed based off the conversation we had earlier this evening. And then we do have a budget transfer for the Legends. It's reducing utilities by $7,000, putting $6,000 in sales tax and $1,000 in bank charges, and that's to realign the budget to pay for expenses. Are there any questions, Mr. Lombardi? All right, that is all we have for finance. I will add that we have additional business that we do have to address, but in order to address this additional business, I do have to make a motion. So I do make a motion that we would move into executive session to discuss potential litigation against the city of Massillon, and this is in accordance with the Ohio Revised Code and the allowances it provides for executive session. I would invite to this executive session all members of council, including the president of council. I would invite the law director, the assistant law director, the mayor of the city service director, and the economic development director, Mr. Maynard.
White,
Yes.
Lewis,
Yes.
Lombardi,
Yes.
Sluse,
Yes.
Sneed,
Yes.
and Viola.
Yes.
8 yes to enter into executive session.